Good morning, students. Today we continue with the topic of the significance of urbanism, and we continue from the second paragraph, which starts with the sentence: "Further, there must be a social organization in place. Fuel, metal, various stones, wood, etc., came from many different places for city manufacturers." In our previous video, if you remember, we were talking about how urbanism had started setting in the civilization and the Mesopotamian areas and the Sumerian areas, basically these civilizations, and a lot of prominent places like Baghdad and quite a few, if you flip through the previous maps, where places like Baghdad and Babylon and Nimrud and the Nasur, they had started coming up. So people were getting into a very cosmopolitan life, and naturally, when large urban setups start coming up, you do not expect massive and huge jungles to be right in the middle of the town. You do not expect the stone quarry to be right in the middle of the town. You do not expect the metals being forged on a larger scale right in the middle of the town. These things start, there are separate ancillary towns which cater to the needs of the people living in large urban settlements. Okay. Then we go into the next topic, which is movement of goods into cities. As you Yes, movements of goods into cities. However rich the food resources of Mesopotamia, its mineral resources were very few. Most parts of South lacked stones for tools, seals, and jewels. The wood of the Iraqi date palm and poplar was not good enough for carts, cartwheels, or boats, and there was no metal for tools, vessels, or ornaments. Now, students, you have to understand. If you just what I read, however rich the food resources of Mesopotamia, what they are now talking about is the crops were good, the harvest was good, the crop was top quality in the areas around Tigris and Euphrates, all around the place. People had enough to eat. Okay, but when you talk about urban areas which need top quality wood, tools, these things were not found in good supply in these areas, where and like it said, Iraqi date palm and the poplar, these are the trees. We are talking about poplar is a kind of tree which you would also see if you go from Dehradun to Delhi. You would see on either side of the national highway there are poplar trees. Now, uh, of course, they have wood, okay, but they are soft woods. They are good for things like furnitures, okay, but they are not good for supporting heavy load like carts or cart wheels or boats. Then you need different kinds of woods altogether. And that is what is being said, that yes, this area was good with certain things, but it lacked other certain things which were also essential. So what happens when you have a system or a situation like this? What happens is, then the trading starts. You start firstly locating the areas which can actually fulfill, which can take care of this shortcoming of yours. And probably there are other areas who have these metals and solid wood, but they do not have certain things that you might be having, like good harvest, good crops, because you live around the river areas and they don't. So then naturally they probably have uh, wood and copper, and that is top quality wood and copper and silver and gold. Now these are the things that you want. A lapis lazuli, these are the things that you have your eyes on, but you don't have them in your area. So naturally they need something you have to offer. Then you need something that they have to offer, and then naturally the trading starts. Now, coming to the second paragraph, that says, besides crafts, trade, and services, efficient transport is also important for urban development. If it takes too much time or too much animal feed to carry grain or charcoal into cities on the pack animals or bullock carts, the city economy would not be viable. Now, this is a very important sentence. It looks kind of an ordinary sentence, students, but this exactly is the reason, you know in earlier times, when people, the only mode of transportation was the livestock, or rather not livestock exactly, but the animals, whether it was through bullocks, whether it was through camels, it was through horses, but then they were animals. Now these animals have to be fed at regular intervals. These animals need water to drink at regular intervals. Now you cannot expect them to go through arid areas day after day. Certainly not. They need grass to graze, they need water to drink, right? So you need routes, you need areas where these things are available. Now, on top of that, you have certain limitations. Now, on a horse, you cannot load 200 kilograms, right? You certainly can't. There is a limitation to which the weight that the horse can take, right? So it is very obvious that you have certain limitations, and that precisely is the reason why the people in any civilization, for that matter, not just in the Mesopotamian civilization, uh, any civilization for that matter, the moment a bit of urbanization used to start, whether you talk about the Chinese civilization, Indian civilization, the moment a certain the civilization used to or the community used to reach a certain level of urbanization, they immediately felt the need for the waterways, because the reason for that being, you can load your boats with huge quantity of the stuff you want to trade in, right? Then you do not have to bother about feeding the boat. You just have to ensure that it is navigable. It doesn't sink. It is just made robust, and it's of a good quality. That's all you need, and you just have to carry your own food stuff, and that is taken care of, right? And you have, so basically you have two advantages. Firstly, you can load massive amount of stuff on the boat when you go through the rivers, when the river is being done through, when the trading is being done through the waterways. And the second advantage is, you do not have to basically feed your boat, right? You just have to feed yourself. And so naturally it is very, very convenient. And the second and the very important thing is, it is very, very economical. So that's what even the Mesopotamian people uh, had realized right in the beginning, and then they started following this practice. Now, when you have riverways, when you have people, when you have a whole urban setup, then naturally a lot of things, you have an item to trade with. So naturally you have to record also a lot of things, and that's why this topic comes up, the development of writing, and what this chapter is about. Now, the first Mesopotamian tablets written around, that is, I'm talking about the second paragraph, written around 3200 before Christ, contained picture like signs and numbers. These were about 5,000 lists of oxen, fish, bread, loaves, etc. Lists of good that were brought into or distributed from the temples of Uruk, a city in the southern, in south. Clearly, writing began when society needed to develop records of transactions, because in city life, transactions occurred at different times and involved many people and a variety of goods. Students, it was not just about maintaining the records of how many animals are there, whether the state owns it or whether the rich landlords own it. It is also about, you have to understand that yes, extensive records had to be maintained about the area of the land, the crops, the harvest, what was the harvest, whatever that unit of measurement might have been. Today it is kilogram. In 5,000 years ago, it could have been something else. But then that had to be measured. Right now, if you have an urban setup where people are continuously going from one part of the kingdom to the other part of the kingdom, then there are checkposts, right? There are checkposts. Now you have to furnish your own identity from whichever town or the village you are coming from. Then if you have to enter those places, those would have to be stamped by them. So all this needs documentation, right? All this needs to be recorded as to how many people actually entered the town in a day, how many people left the town in a day. Now, you cannot, and no one can, memorize all this. Today, we have elaborate structures, huge departments, crores and crores rupee worth of computers are purchased. Why? Just to maintain those records, right? So, now, how were those records being maintained? Just look at this image. This is a very important image. Now, this is something which started, which was rather very unique to this civilization or this area. We did not have such elaborate and very specific method of documentation in our Indus Valley civilization areas, though they were contemporary civilizations. But we did not have such elaborate record making and record keeping, and that's precisely the reason as we our knowledge about Indus Valley civilization is quite limited in a lot of areas where um, we would have ideally liked to know more. Okay, now Mesopotamian wrote on tablets of clay. That's what it is, tablets of clay. A scribe would wet clay and pat it into the size he could hold comfortably in one hand. He would carefully smoothen its surfaces with a sharp end of a reed cut obliquely. He would press wedge-shaped signs on the smoothened surface while it was still moist. Guys, it is essentially about uh, you know when if you remember when you were young, or rather in fact when you were a kid, we have done a similar kind of activity when we used to make small figures with our during the Diwali days, and not to the extent of a very good finish, but it is, just imagine that there you have a structure or some kind of a god or a goddess or a human form, and then you are using a small twig to actually make its eyes and nose and smile and its limbs or whatever it is. So instead of doing all this, you have a tablet of clay. This clay is being used first. It is being made of a size which is easier for you to not just hold, but it is easier for you to kind of manage. It's exactly, you can say, today we talk about Apple Slate and all these kind of things, and Apple Tablet and all those things. But this is the ideal size. This is the size that you hold to watch today, probably a lot of things you do with your Apple stuff. This is the ideal size which human beings figured out 5,000, 6,000 years ago, and that's how they have been reading. So it is not something unique which Steve Jobs or Apple came up with, right? We have been using tablets for the last 5,000, 6,000 years. And because this is something which we have found to be of the ideal size, of the ideal make, and we have always found it convenient. And that is what people the Mesopotamian civilization were doing as well. We shall continue tomorrow. Thank you.